January 1236. Fernando III was planning a long campaign to take Cordoba when a messenger came running into the throne room and announced that a group of Castilians had taken on their own initiative part of the city. He had to march to their aid. Year 1235. Fernando III is the monarch of Leon and Castile, and he has a long-term plan. An ambitious plan that will deal a critical blow to Islam on the Iberian Peninsula. Cordoba, the mythical capital of the Caliphate of Cordoba, which after the death of Almanzor had lost its importance, and now it had been replaced by Seville as the capital of Al-Andalus. It had to be Christian. Fernando had planned to slowly surround Cordoba and Seville, and for this he had taken over places like Medellin or Santa Cruz. A campaign that directly aimed to take one of the two cities would be madness. It would wear down the kingdom a lot. The Almohads were in full military and political decomposition since the Battle of Las Navas de Tolosa, and this was taken advantage of. He had made several deals with the Muslim leaders who were beginning to emerge within the Almohad Empire. Basically, it was a kind of vassalage in which the Saracens paid tributes. Take note. How has the political map of the peninsula changed? What have appeared are what are called the Zero Taifa kingdoms, which will be quite fleeting. Yes, everything is clear so far. Well, it turns out that the ruler of Cordoba, Imhol, to raise funds to pay the tributes, had wildly increased taxes in his domains. And of course, this is something that his inhabitants rejected. But how could they refuse? Well, it turns out that on a dark December night in the year 1235, a group of non-Mozarabic Muslims secretly left Cordoba and went to a Christian camp located in Andujar. And who were in Andujar? The Almogavars, the feared Aragonese company, were there. They went straight to the point. If the Almogavars swore to depose Ibn Hud, they would help them take the city. Now these Saracens came from Axerquia, not from the capital itself. What do I mean? Well, Axerquia is this part over here, an old suburb now surrounded by a wall, but separated from the rest of the city by another wall. However, the Almogavars, who were known for their fearlessness and great courage, accepted the challenge. They notified the nearest Castilian chief of what they were going to do. In case of success or failure, they had to finish occupying the city. Once that procedure was done, the Almogavars departed. That same night, guided by the new Saracen allies. Without bonfires and with hardly any moonlight, they arrived at the walls of Axerquia. They placed ladders against the walls and immediately began to climb the walls. When a sentinel saw them, he would approach them and say, "I am one of those you already know." That is, he was with them and would not sound the alarm. Without causing a scandal and only eliminating those who opposed the Christian conquest, they managed to take Axerquia. At dawn, the Cordobans were astonished to see that the flags waving over the towers were not Almohad. They were Castilian. Immediately, the entire garrison of Cordoba, far superior in number to the Aragonese, in turn laid siege to Axerquia, so that the Aragonese and rebellious Saracens were trapped inside. As best they could, they sent a message to King Fernando, who was in Benavente. There was a Christian host trapped in Cordoba, and they needed His Majesty's help to save their lives and surrender the city. Upon receiving the news, Fernando III immediately set off, summoning all the available troops of the kingdom. For he was aware that if Ibn Hud, who was in Murcia at that time, set off for Cordoba, a battle could take place that could turn into a defeat for Christianity, which would delay the advance to the south by decades. There was no time to lose. Despite being the dead of winter in January of the year 1236, his troops headed south, and along the way men kept arriving who came to save the Almogavars and take Cordoba, while Fernando marches south. I must highlight that Cordoba is for Muslims what Toledo is for Christians. The crown jewel, the religious and historical reference. Toledo by the Visigoths and Cordoba by the Caliphate of Cordoba, hence its importance. Before it arrives, please subscribe and consider becoming a Patreon for exclusive videos. Like James III, Julius Caesar, or the Aragonese conquest of Sicily. Come on, gentlemen. We have to reach 150,000 subscribers. Oh, Fernando III has already arrived. Okay, I continue. On the 7th of February of the year, 1236, Fernando III had the walls of Cordoba before him. He received the news that Ibn Hud had left Murcia with a large army to rescue Cordoba, and if he managed to arrive and reinforce the garrison, the siege would be impossible and the Axerquia would be lost. What did he do? Well, he sent a contingent of troops to the Calahorra Tower, which was defended by a small group of Saracens. They could not resist, and within minutes the gate of the tower fell and the defenders were put to the sword. With the tower in his power, he ordered barricades to be built and the gate to be reinforced. It was the only access to Cordoba by the river, so they had to defend it at all costs. But even so, if the Muslims were stubborn, they could cross the river, so they needed something more. When the Muslims arrived, they camped and prepared for the assault the next day. But that night, Fernando III tried a trick. He ordered his men to separate and in very small groups light bonfires around Doki. Clear. When Ibn Hud spotted thousands of bonfires on the other side of the river, he thought an impressive army was waiting for him, so he aborted the assault. The next day, the Saracens packed up their things and went back the way they had come. The Muslim leader did not want to lose Cordoba, but it turns out that James the First was pressing in Valencia, so he had to decide which city to save. And seeing the number of men there were here, he decided on Valencia. The Muslim troops left the battlefield and returned to Murcia. What did the Cordovan garrison do then? Well, they decided to surrender. They sent a delegation to the Christian camp to offer the city in exchange for safe conduct, to march to Muslim lands safe and sound. But upon arriving at the camp, they discovered the monarch's trick. The besieging army was much smaller than it appeared. So upon returning to the city, they decided to abandon the idea of surrendering and continue resisting. Did they have confidence that their leader would also discover the trick and return with his men? Or, even at worst, that some epidemic would break out in the Christian camp, and they would be forced to abandon the siege? And they were not wrong. 3 months after starting the siege, various Leonese nobles or commanders proposed returning to their land. You know, summer comes and the countryside needs people. Besides, maintaining an army and campaign is expensive. Very expensive, so the sooner it ends, the better. However, Fernando III had faith in his mission, and despite the requests from his circle, decided to maintain the siege. Finally, on Saturday, June 29 of the year, 1236, almost 6 months after the Almogavars took the Axerquia, Cordoba surrendered. Part of the Christian nobility tried to slaughter the Muslims of the city, but Fernando III, following the example of his predecessors, respected the lives of the Cordobans. The inhabitants were able to leave alive with all their belongings and were escorted to Muslim lands. The next day, on June 30th, Fernando III made his triumphant entry into the city. Okay, do you remember Almanzor? In the last chapter, I mentioned that he had looted Santiago de Compostela and forced Christians to carry the cathedral bells on their shoulders all the way to Cordoba. Up here I leave you his complete life in case you haven't seen the video. Well then, once the city was taken and the bells were rescued, they were carried on the shoulders of Muslims to Galicia, where they were reinstalled in Santiago de Compostela. But now Fernando III has a problem. It turns out that there are hardly any Muslims left in the city, and that 100 years ago the former Christians from the nearby areas had marched north. When Alfonso the Battler launched his campaign for Andalusia, he had to repopulate the city by any means necessary. His men wanted to return to their homes, not stay there, so he needed settlers, and these arrived. The monarch sent messages to all points of the kingdom requesting settlers, and from the 29th of September, a large number of Castilians left their lands and migrated south to Cordoba. But when I say a lot, I mean a lot. The chronicle tells that so many settlers arrived that there were not enough houses to accommodate them all. In fact, a famine soon broke out and the king had to send gold and food to the city to be able to sustain the population. He also organized the territory, ensuring that no field was left uncultivated and no person was without bread. And what did the loss of Córdoba imply? It was a brutal blow to Islam. Think, as I said before, that it was the capital of the Emirate of Córdoba, later of the Caliphate of Córdoba. It was a symbol for Islam, an example of Islam's expansionist capacity, just like that. Because of a betrayal by the Muslims themselves, the city had fallen. After the fall of Córdoba, various cities surrendered to the powerful monarch of Castile and Leon, while others had to be besieged or assaulted. One after another. Osuna, Montoro, Lucena, all would be governed by Christianity. Only one goal remains of the two that Fernando III had set: Seville. But this, ladies and gentlemen, we will see in the next chapter.